Hello, my name is Paul Gruhn, and I am the professor at Quinnipiac University for ICM590 Project Planning. This is the fall semester 2013. With me is Lynn Van Sweden. Lynn has worked with me at Yale University for about a year now. Matter of fact, I think you're celebrating your 1 year next week, you said.
Yes.
Lynn has been into project management professionally for 17 years. She's a certified PMP, which means project management professional. Been at Yale a year and has also been on the board of directors of the Southern New England PMI for 5 years. Lynn and I met here at Yale when she came on as a consultant. She's now full-time, and we really put her through a lot of hell. In our first project, we did an upgrade to web methods, but maybe that's for another video and another tape. This module, we're talking about communication, and communication is key in any relationship, in anything in life, is to communicate effectively. And it also seems to be one of the biggest problems why things and projects don't happen. So I've asked Lynn to give us her take on a couple of different aspects as we've been studying communication this week. So first of all, Lynn, what is communication? What is good communication to you?
So for me, good communication comes down to some basic ideas. It is the right message to the right people who have the right understanding of what it is you're communicating.
So by having the right message to the right people, what types of things, how do you define the right message? What do you mean by that right message? How do you get that clarity of that?
That's a great question. For myself, it usually starts when I'm looking at a communication plan around a stakeholder analysis. Who are really the stakeholders that I need to be communicating to? And I try to be very careful not to just look at the management level or above. When I'm looking for stakeholders, I'm looking for the people who are actually going to be impacted by the change that my project is bringing about.
So the people who you said who are impacted, that are you're involved in a project and change is going to happen to something and somebody,
Yes.
and you want to have those people involved.
Exactly.
So it just doesn't show up on them. You mentioned something, we didn't talk about this, but you mentioned a communication plan. You want to touch base on a little bit of what do you think about when you think of a communication plan, and how does that fit in to the whole scope of a project? If I'm installing software, I just care about installing my software, but you talk about this thing, the communication plan. What's that all about?
If I'm the project manager on a project and we're installing software, I guess my first question would be: is it already software that exists, or is it new software? But regardless, one of the things I do is I go through a communication plan, usually within 60 days of having a signed charter. And it's not just a matrix of my users and types of communication and dates. When I put together a communication plan, it usually includes information out of the charter. It has some verbiage around the different stakeholders I might be looking for, some of the impacts that I might be looking for on the stakeholders, that kind of information, so that I take it in a little bit deeper than just the matrix.
Okay, now give me some examples of communications that you might be planning to send out. What, like for instance, on the Web Methods project, you sent out a lot of various communications. What were some of those communications that you had to organize and send out?
When I'm working on communications to go out, I want to make sure that nobody is surprised. And so I like to start sending out communications saying, hey, this is happening. You're going to hear some more from us. And then as the rollout or the testing comes closer, I like to send out an email saying, hey, we talked to you a while back. We're letting you know now that we're ready for this piece. We would love to have your involvement, that kind of information. And then as we're going through implementation, as of this day when you come in, you're going to be able to see this on your screen, be able to take these actions, those kind of communications.
And would communications also include training and things like that?
Absolutely.
I've been in the IT business now for a long time, and failure and breakdown in communication doesn't seem to be a new thing, a new idea at all. It always seems that at the end of the project, when we do some sort of final project assessment, we say, well, communication could have been better. Why do you think there is failure in communication in so many projects, and it's not a new thing. It seems to be plague every project.
Yep. And
Why is it there?
That's another really good question. Let me take you through a story. I was at a conference a couple months ago, and I was facilitating a table on rescuing non-performing projects. And various people from the organization were coming, sitting at the table, going through their projects with me in hopes we could identify maybe some pieces that were not around or missing, so to speak, to help get their non-performing projects moving. Some interesting statistics. 75% of the projects that sat down at that table didn't have charters. 100% of the projects that sat down at that table did not have a communications plan.
So that's interesting that one of the failures of all of these projects that were kind of in a doomed state, the first thing, they didn't have a charter. And that, we've talked about that in our class as really project definition. And so if you don't know what it is you're going to do, if it's not defined, you're not starting off on the right foot at all. And then the next thing you said was they didn't have a communication plan.
Right.
And that caused failure. Why else does communication seem to plague us as being problematic?
I think another challenge for project managers is they'll develop a communications plan at the beginning of the project, sometimes to check off a box and sometimes just because they know they need to, but then they don't use it, throughout the project. And for me, a communication plan is something that I bring up and review frequently. One, I want to make sure that I'm doing what it is I've said that I was going to do in the plan. And secondly, has something else come up? Have I identified a new stakeholder? Has there been a different phase or something added to the project that needs to be added to the communication plan?
So one of the failures in communication is, one, you might even set a communication plan but not implement it. And another one is not reviewing that plan. And then you added on another piece, which was the whole idea of being agile to adjust your plan and realize that things come up. We've talked about planning for the unplanned in a project in our class. You even have to do that in your communication plan.
Absolutely.
Okay. The last thing I'd like to ask you is, what were some tips? What were some things that you do to help ensure that good communication happens so we do have successful projects?
I'm a pretty basic person, and I like to take my communication tips back to some very basic communication tips that we got back in grade school. I go back to the 5 W's. When I'm communicating or developing a communication plan, either I want to make sure I'm answering all 5 of those questions. Who, what, when, where, why, and sometimes how. And I feel like if my communication plan addresses that, and if my communication addresses those questions, that I've got a good communication.
Right. So oftentimes in a lot of things in life, we try to overcomplicate things, and maybe sometimes it is just like you said, the basics of those 5 W's. And that's actually a good idea. In some of our discussions, I don't think anybody mentioned that as a thing, and we all learned that, like you said, back in grade school.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to give my students as final closing thoughts and ideas on the whole area of communication?
The only other piece of, or the only other tip I would really have for communication is, communication is just not the outward sending of communications, but it's also receiving the communication. And as project managers, I sometimes encourage people to remember there's a reason we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. And we really need to be listening to what it is our teams are saying, what it is our users are needing, and those are the things that will aid in having a good communication plan.
So good communication doesn't necessarily mean just sending out emails. It might mean reading them as well.
Exactly.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time, and I hope we get to do this again on some other topics.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Right.